Good afternoon. You are all very welcome. I'm Tom Pollock, the Commercialization Manager at Learnovate, and I will be the MC today. We have a busy hour ahead of us, commencing with Peter Gillis's highly acclaimed presentation on showing the business value of L&D, featuring the four-stage measurement model that Learnovate have developed over the last 2 years of research. So Peter's on stage now. I'll turn it over to him.
Thanks a million, Tom. Good afternoon, everybody. And be it only virtually, it is great to connect again with our community through these events, and of course look forward to, in the not too distant future, hopefully being able to run these in face-to-face scenarios. What I'd love to do is to just take you, as Tom said, just through the last 2 years research that we've put in, and it's been a really interesting journey. I'd like to share with you where we've got to, because realistically, we've kind of made good progress over this time. So I hope you enjoy this. Ironically, we're going to be talking about Kpis an awful lot this afternoon. So, and in relation to Kpis, what I want to do is to show you this model. So it's a model on how to show this business value of L&D. And I presume the really important word here is business. So this model is focused in on delivering that business value. And it also brings the second point that I'd like to sort of hope to get across to you today, is this idea of maybe considering this mindset that goes along with the model. And it's a mindset of separating when you're measuring business metrics and when you're measuring learner metrics. And just making that slight distinction between the two actually appears to be very beneficial in getting the job done of understanding business value. So they're the two kind of ideas, the model and the mindset, that I'd like to get through today. Now at Learnovate, we love a painful problem. I mean, that's what we're looking for all the time. And that's again why we're a very heavily membership-led organization, because it's through our membership that we can identify and raise these problems that we want to tackle within the center. Because if we're addressing a painful problem, it's creating value. So in terms of this one, we went to the industry and we spoke to our industry members, and we asked them, what is the painful problems that you're facing at the moment? And the one that came back front and center was this idea of, can you help us show the business value of L&D, and specifically to the C-suite or the senior management team? It was this idea of showing that value on up the chain, because again, very often L&D is seen pretty much as a cost center and not so much as a strategic partner. So how can we move the needle on showing this value? So that's the painful problem we decided to take on and have a look at. And this is basically what we're going to talk about today. We'll be done in about a half an hour, but this is the agenda that will fit in over that half an hour. To talk to you about the phase one area, where we looked at the problem. And in Learnovate, again, this is the way we tackle every problem. It's get into the weeds and really understand the nature of that problem. And to do that in phase one, we triangulated between what was the academic literature saying in this space, what was the industry sources saying in this space. And then, as we know, there are companies that do actually show business value very well. So could we get and talk to a few of those people? And what could we learn from those guys who are doing it well at the moment? Moving on from there, we went into a rapid co-create phase. And Davey's on our panel today, and Davey was part of our co-creation project. So at that phase, we went to see, with our model, what could we do? What could we do to build out a support for L&D? And then briefly, I'm going to talk about phase three, which is where we're at now. And we're developing some software to support L&D in the endeavor of delivering business value. So in that phase one, and turning to the literature, actually at the start of the project, it's interesting that that book that you see on screen at the moment came out at the same time. The business side of learning design and technologies. It was a good insight for us because a lot of the research work had been done. And as I said, I have no relationship at all with Sharon, but it's probably a book you might want to look up and if you're interested in this space, maybe get your hands on. And this is just a flavor of all the literature that we looked at. But if you look to the left of the screen, we have Kirkpatrick and Kirkpatrick themselves saying, listen, we can't coast along anymore on this idea about continuous learning and employee development. we have to be providing that compelling evidence that we're helping the bottom line, shift again the idea and contribute to the business. So as I say, this is just a pure sample of all the literature we looked at, but we certainly see that while, again, I have to say there are companies that are doing this very well, the bulk of companies are not, or actually not even considering it. And really, as I say, the evidence from the literature says we got to move on. We've got to move on. One other interesting piece that came out of the literature was, if we look over the fence into higher education, they use these terms learning analytics and academic analytics, and they draw a distinction between the two. And again, if I draw you back to that first slide where I'm saying about a shift in mindset, this kind of, in some ways, puts it together for you. It's this idea that the learning analytics are there to serve the efficient and meaningful instruction, and how we can support students. The academic analytics are akin to sort of business intelligence, and how can we use data to actually inform and manage the academic enterprise coming out of the learning activities. So that idea of a distinction is one we'll definitely come back to. Moving over to what the industry were saying. So we looked at what Udemy for Business were saying, and they had this very large, I think it was 3,000 organizations that they surveyed. And this is the data they get back. So when looking at measuring return on investment, you can see here 44% said we're doing it very well. And actually, if you add the first two, you end up that 75% of companies were saying they're doing return on investment either well or very well, 75%. So that was a bit of a jar when you think of what we're being asked to look at. But then when we look at what people were measuring to deliver ROI, and I know you probably cannot read these, but the top one there is training satisfaction, and the second one is training completion. Now, these are metrics that were being reported in relation to ROI. And if we go all the way to the bottom, we can forget the bottom two because one is other and the other one is don't track. So the last sort of meaningful one we have is revenue growth, and the one above it is correlation metrics. So for a start, we can see maybe there's a confusion here around the language even of what metrics we actually trap to measure return on investment or business value, which I prefer to think of. Looking towards maturity, they reported these findings from their global survey, that 33% are identifying key performance indicators at the start. But you can see that it drops off as you go along. 19% only get the opportunity to revisit. And when we get right down to the end, there's only actually about 11% calculating return on investment. So like I say, it really does show strong evidence that it's an area that hasn't really been, conquered for the guys yet. When they were asked what were the blockers, I've kind of grouped these into three blocks for us. The top ones, you can see them yourselves, but they all refer to this idea of the team, the L&D team. So they either don't have the skills or knowledge to actually tackle this. The second is this idea of, getting access to the relevant business data or business sources that they might need to basically construct any such data and produce figures. And then finally, a grouping around the whole idea of compliance and privacy. So obviously, again, if we're going to put a solution together, we're going to need to consider those sort of blockers going forward. The last area I said we looked at in phase one was this idea of what it looked like. And we spoke to, I think, about 7 companies who are all seen by their senior management team as doing this well. And in talking to those companies, we were across the span. I mean, we were talking to call centers, we were talking to software development firms, and as you can see here, a multinational pharmaceutical and a DIY chain. So we see that at least it's something that doesn't seem to be stopped from happening due to industry type. But in particular, I just want to draw attention to these two guys, Tom and David, who spoke to us, because in interviewing them, I just sort of started to see strong similarities between these two individuals. And the first was that they were both Lean Six Sigma green belts. Now, in terms of being Lean Six Sigma green belts, what's that tell us? It just means that they kind of think this way. They think, how can I show business value? Because it's in their DNA nearly through their training. So it's a mindset, shall we say. The second is they were both recent departments. Now, if you're listening to this today and saying, well, I've been in this company for 10 years, obviously you can't just make it a recent department. But maybe you can draw a line in the sand and say, set out a program and say, well, from here, let's change how we do this. At least experiment and see if we can move forward and find if it works for us or not. They both plan for business. Now, I go back to that bit at the beginning about treating it again as separate activities. So before they start any intervention, they're thinking, what's the business angle and how might it manifest and how might it show it? They're both willing to experiment and live or die by that data. So they set out their stall in terms of saying, what can I measure and what can I measure again? And how can I bring those together to see if the intervention has had an effect? They seek advocates. So in terms of, certainly in the early stages, if you're starting from a position where maybe L&D isn't seen as a strategic partner, if you can find an advocate to work with you and move towards that, it can really be a great way to get moving. They never rocked up to the senior management team and said, hey, look what we did. They actually always involved other departments such as finance, commercial, or sales, or HR to get further data that solidified the story that they were telling. And they broadcast the business outcomes. And that was a really strong one, from the point of view of moving from sort of, say, for want of a better, maybe from smiley sheets results to actually broadcasting what effect it had had on the business. And that actually, they believe, really changed how they were perceived. So as I say, there were just similarities across these two guys that I thought was interesting because they're both definitely seen as strategic partners in their firms. Just to give you an example of one from one of these guys. So in looking to the DIY home and garden chain, they were ongoing with store upgrades when David joined the company. So in the previous year, an amount of stores had been upgraded and it had been quite a significant investment to completely refurbish how these stores felt and operated. And David was tasked with bringing in the training to align the staff in terms of collaboration, positive mindset, being on brand, and matching the customer expectation with the new reality of the stores. Now, I think what's really interesting, to just pause there for a second, is the idea that very often you will hear when you talk to people that they say, oh, well, look, if it's sales training, it's going to be easy to show the business value because sales will go up. But if you look at this training was really an awful lot around the idea of soft skills. It wasn't hard sales training. It was around this idea of collaboration, positive mindset, and aligning kind of brand expectation with the new brand deliverable. Now, in terms of experiments, David said, well, okay, we've all these stores that were refurbed before I got here, and now we have the ones that have been refurbed while I'm here. So what he did was he brought his training first to the stores that were now being done. And then, again, reaching out to finance, HR, and actually looking at the economic value difference as well. He measured how the stores from last year had performed in the subsequent 6 months. And he measured how the ones that had received the training this year had performed in the subsequent 6 months. So he had his kind of control and experimental nice piece of work on David's behalf to think of doing it. But there is that sort of detective piece, which I'll talk about, needed to think about how you did. So he measured this year versus last year. They took everything into account because these are big numbers we're talking about here. And to make sure that, as I say, the economic environment, the store ranges, all those things were factored in and made sure they were equal to see that they were measuring like week. And what they saw was significant sales increase sustained over time for the stores that had received the training versus the other stores. And again, I can't share the figures, but suffice to say, these were significant numbers, way up in the millions, way up in the millions. So again, this showed that David was bringing value through this. And again, it was correlated. He wasn't calling it causation, but it was correlated with the fact that the training had been given to those stores. And David's advice out of that was, do start with a champion. get somebody to buy in as we're talking. So he started with, in his earlier stages, with one product manager in there. And they put together a business plan. So they had a solid case to stand up before the intervention and say, this is what we think will happen when we do this. And that business plan was designed in languages that would appeal to all the different audiences that he knew he might have to face. And as he was successful in the earlier days, not the one we've just talked about, he broadcast those business outcomes. And the first thing that he found happened was, well, the advocate said, yeah, let's do this again. It worked. So you helped me and you helped our business unit. So let's see what else we can do. And of course, beyond that, in innovation terms, he created pull. Other people saw this guy can actually strategically help business units move. So he had the other sections all starting to come to him then. So as I say, it's a lovely story, and it gave us a lot of food for thought. Also at this time, during the research, I came across this ad. Novartis, the global pharmaceutical, were looking for a learning insights and analytics lead in Dublin. And I know Darren and Ken out there, so I just thought during the course of the research, it'd be interesting to have a chat and see where they're going with that one. And what they said is they spend tens of millions at the moment on training. But within Novartis, L&D has to fight because people in Novartis have the right to use outside suppliers if they wish. So L&D has to be very keen and sharp within Novartis, and they need to show value. And they said currently they're absolutely excellent at showing Kirkpatrick levels 1 through 3. So this idea of they will show the satisfaction, the learning, and the behavior change. But they're kind of struggling to move beyond that. And they believe that if they could get this strategist in, the opportunity was there to dip into the data. And first off, show the business value, finish out the chain. But actually, they have ideas that they can move beyond that. And in terms of being a true strategic partner, that they will be able to forecast when gaps might come and where training interventions might sort of fill any hole that might potentially be coming down the horizon. That they would be able to bring these key trends and understand how to support the business best from a training and development perspective in a sort of proactive fashion. So a great shift and obviously, as we can see, very much a strategic partner role. And the guys also said to me, don't forget as well that when you're bringing stuff to the senior management team, it's all about the storytelling, visualizing what you want to put across in a good fashion, and moving out of this idea of causation and moving to an area of correlation. Yeah, so this idea of not having to sort of account for penny. We're part of the team that have been involved in this progress. And while we're talking about those measures, just to look at the ones that are kind of currently there, I won't stay too long on this one because we know, obviously, Kirkpatrick at this stage. And love it or hate it, it is probably still the biggest one out there. And I certainly, from this and from other projects and pretty much every project we ever do in Learnovate, it's really regular. You'll hear people talk about the level 1, 2, 3, or 4. They're just kind of referred to as a given. But they do tend to focus a lot on the learner and can be a difficult one to map across then. How do you get to the business value? The other one is Phillips, the ROI model. And certainly most people that I've spoken to, again, within this project and others, find the Phillips one kind of a bit onerous. From the very outset, it looks like it's going to be something that's going to take a lot of time. And at the end of the day, there is still a guesswork aspect in that model to sort of say, well, what percentage did L&D play? So haven't found much sort of uptake for that one either. So as our research done, then we kind of said, well, what can we do with all this information? Where can we go with it? And the first thing we're sort of saying is, if we're going to put a model together, I think L&D have to think about adding 2 more hats to the many, many hats you guys already wear. First, being a detective, I've kind of referred to this earlier, this idea of, well, how can I find out what's the business value? And if it's going to be the business value, it probably produces a number with a currency symbol in front of it. That's more than likely what you're looking for. So there is a little bit of that needed to come into it. But it doesn't have to be done on your own. And relations builder. And again, I know L&D would be very good at relationship building because they deal usually across different segments of the organization. But like I say, in terms of receiving support for digging out data and sources that you may want to support your case, just who can I talk to? Who can I bring in to help with me? So kind of just maybe thinking about those two ideas. And then what might a model look like? So if we go back to this model, Kirkpatrick, and we talk about the 4 levels as we have them there. And like I say, again, from years of talking to L&D, you do hear people saying, you know, well, we'd never get to 4. We get to 3 sometimes. We're doing well on 1 and 2. But if we just look at this model again, I mean, the learner reacted, the learner learned, the learner's behavior changed, and was there a business result impact? So there is a disjoint there because those first 3 are focusing on the learner. And again, traditionally, to my mind, L&D have this kind of altruistic stance where, you know, the business is about supporting the learner. So that's absolutely fundamental and important. But to expect to be able to jump from there to a business result can be a leap because there's data missing from there. It doesn't follow the chain. You need other information. So in trying to design a model, I thought the first thing probably we need to do is this. We need to take that results thing out of the chain and make it like a parallel activity that runs alongside any measurement we might want to do for learners, and just to focus in a bit more on that. So on the left, we can see we have our Kirkpatrick first 3 levels, and they are learner-focused metrics. And on the right, we have our 4-step business-focused metrics. And what I'm saying is that it also, you can see, it starts before the learning intervention and it goes on after. Because again, this idea that you plan for your business measurement. So you start that before you start the intervention. And you're usually going to measure it after the intervention has finished to see if the effect has sustained. So it will start before and finish after your learning intervention. And looking at it, I broke it down into 4 steps. You plan, as we said, to see your business case and put it forward. You then explore to find what data can support the plan that you want to achieve. And then you analyze post the intervention to see, did it have that effect? And then from there, you share on that business model. So 4 steps to follow, and 4 steps that are flexible enough to apply in most situations. But we have got scaffolding to help L&D get through it. So if you look at those 4 letters, they were our P's: plan, explore, analyze, and share. But this was just a hypothesized model from the research. So we were sort of asking ourselves, well, what can we do with this now? And in terms of plan, we dug into sort of thinking, well, we use innovation services within Learnovate all the time. And you may be familiar with the value proposition canvas. We thought if you actually take your organization as being your customer, not the person who requests the L&D off you, and not the end person who's receiving that training, but actually the organization. And jobs to be done translates also to problems to be solved. And this is actually like a workshop method where you drill in and understand what is the problem the organization's trying to solve by coming to us in the first place. And following through this workshop method, you can actually funnel out what would be the outcomes and what would be the barriers to getting those business goals achieved. And from that point, now you can start to look at L&D's services and see how does that match up in terms of solving those gain creators and pain relievers. And basically, that's all that left-hand stuff in terms of where you would be looking for your learner measurement. But they're driving the business outcomes that we've defined in our plan on the right. To give an example, on one of the cases that we worked on, there was delivering at full capacity quicker was a problem that the organization was trying to solve. So this was actually around sales training and getting the sales staff to deliver at full capacity quicker. And if we identify that as the problem to be solved, And can we convert that into kind of a monetary number? What could we do? And this is the detective hat coming into play here. Next, then we look to explore and see, well, what evidence could we gather that would support our business plan? And in this case, just to move on with that one, so if we're delivering at full capacity quicker, what would the evidence come from? Well, the first thing is that we would obviously be thinking there'd be increased sales, because if they're getting to that capacity quicker, they would no doubt have a budget, yeah, and they would be delivering that full capacity budget quicker. But in addition, there would be saved time, because if they're getting there quicker, there is saved time from the coaches or from the trainers or from whoever else might be working with them to get them to that full capacity, because it's not taking as long. And moving beyond that saved time, what could you convert that saved time to? So in terms of potentially the sales that those people could in turn generate because they're not spending time training. So looking into the evidence, and this is where you'd make your pitch and say, yeah, that's what we think we can do. Now, when you're putting a business case together, it's really important to sort of show the money if you can. Avoid too much warm, they're going to love it, that sort of thing. Try and avoid any sort of to be decideds, yeah? So can you actually just sort of put the plan together without we'll work that out in the way? And in true consultancy form, you should really be talking about it not being the only way, just saying by this approach, this is what we think we could do. Or the alternative, we might look at another way. But just again, not to be too rigid around that. And then when it comes to the analyze, keep it simple. There's no need. And again, from the examples that we've seen across the research and through our co-creation, just keep it simple. Measure time A, do your intervention, measure again at time B, and see has there been a difference. Back to this idea of correlation, not causation. Going back to the example from the hardware chain, you have a control group and an experimental group. So if you're working in some sort of area where you have the ability to do this, can you train one group prior to the other group and see, is there a difference between those groups? Now, those just two simple methods, I reckon, will fit just about most cases that you might want to measure if you're trying to look and elevate this business value. So very simple methods. On the correlation thing, just to make a point as well, typically L&D teams are being funded right now. So you're being funded to do this work already, and potentially at the moment, you're not showing this business value. So actually, your organization already sees value in paying for this training. So I would suggest don't make it hard on yourself. Just sort of say, by the way, additionally, what we did correlates to an increase X, Y, or Z. And then sharing out that data. This particular slide has absolutely nothing to do with L&D, but it's just a very nice example of how visualization of data can really help. So these are the daily routines of famous creative people. And we can just look at all that data there and very quickly see that these creative people appear not to have been big fans of exercise. Yet, they seem to be reasonably fond of food and leisure. So again, can you use a visualization? Because again, when we're talking to the senior management team, we need to be sharp and we need to get our story across quickly. So how can we use data visualization or storytelling, as I mentioned earlier? So we moved into phase 2 over the summer last year, and we decided to take on this project, this model that we'd hypothesized and see, could it work? And we reached out to our membership again. And in talking to the membership, we got 2 really keen members to come on board and basically play with us in co-creating and seeing if we could get this thing to work like a model. And it was a multinational law firm and a financial institution. And this was really just about co-creating a paper prototype. We didn't develop any technology. Over 4 months, we had 5 online workshops. So there wasn't a lot, it wasn't a heavy onerous task on the companies. We left the share out just to kind of help us focus in on what we're up to. And we started off with our plan. So in terms of looking for the problem to be solved, the organization was our focus. And the sort of top level request to L&D was improve onboarding. So going back to our idea of probing and understanding what's the business angle that's being sought to be addressed here. And we worked out that the problems were, it's not working very well, it's taking too long, and too many people are exiting. Now, they were the problems that the organization currently have as to why they wanted to improve onboarding. And in workshopping further, we were able to say that the time to deliver onboarding was a barrier. And if we were successful, again, this is the sales organization, so we'd have them delivering at full capacity quicker, and we'd improve retention, hopefully. So now we're starting to work all the way from improve onboarding to understanding, can we show that it will sort of deliver full capacity quicker, improve retention, and reduce time? Obviously, with the same effectiveness, no point if it doesn't. And as we worked it through, we realized that there's kind of a statement that covered everything we're talking about, and it's this one. So this is like a fill in the blank statement that basically gives you your business value statement. And it's, if the intervention is successful, it will have a behavior impact, which has a correlated impact for the organization across X amount of participants, delivering $ business value. Again, we found this worked as we worked out with the two companies over the summer, but we also found that we could retrofit this statement to all those companies that we talked to in phase one. So this seems to be the structure for putting together a business value statement. Again, to turn that into one of the case studies, if the sales onboarding program is successful, it brings a new sales team to full target 4 weeks earlier. Additional sales of 5,000, because that's the increased amount of target those salespeople have if they're at full strength. For the organization, at 6 participants per quarter, delivering 120,000 additional sales per quarter. This is one of the strands, if we go back to the previous slide. So this is just one of those strands that start to compile the overall business value that can be delivered. And now, just to briefly take you through the two companies, the 4 months, that bit of sandboxing, we overall understood that the onboarding program could deliver in total 700,000 in value to the company. A second project was around personal career development, and basically because, again, this was causing a certain amount of dissatisfaction within the firm, that it could deliver a cost, a value of 884,000. And involved in there are the ideas of rehire, the costs of training, etc., coming up to 884,000. Moving to the second company who participated over the summer, they looked at one office and looked at if they were to just very simply move to an online rather than face-to-face instructor-led model, where participants had to travel. They could deliver a cost saving of 1,774 just for that one office, but also give back 48 hours. Now, again, we have to say, obviously all of this is dependent on the training being as good, if not better, than what was there already. And in this case, again, I go back to that lies over on the L&D side and is taken as a given. This organization has about 200 offices, so we were talking about 354,000 in terms of value to the company, and actually potentially giving back 243 weeks. Now, the guy who was involved in this particular project decided to take the model and move it on because sustainability and ecological concerns are all so much front and center. And applying the same model, he actually went on to say, you could save 36 tons of carbon dioxide through this L&D intervention, which of course isn't a very major one. So, as I say, they were starting to make up their own jokes. So he was taking the model and moving it on and using it to show sustainability benefits, which, as I say, are going to become more and more relevant. Now, the people who participated in this had never been sort of introduced to anything related to business value of L&D prior to us starting our sandbox in the summer. But look at this, over a couple of months and only over a couple of projects, we're showing the guts of 2 million in business value to these organizations, 240 weeks and 36 tons of carbon dioxide saved. So with very little effort, actually, it's a massive shift in the perception of what L&D is actually doing. You know, does this stuff make L&D nervous? Of course it does, yeah. But I mean, even if we went to that previous slide, and if that was one company, if you went back and said we delivered 750,000, it's still impressive, and it's still 750,000 more than you're probably talking about today. It also puts you into that strategic role of saying, well, if it doesn't work, if it didn't do anything, you're sort of saying, well, hang on, maybe training was the wrong solution here, you know? And again, if we want to move into that whole area, and I believe L&D doesn't have a choice of being a strategic partner, you know, you have to be prepared to sort of put out your stall and see how it fared, and as a strategic partner, adjust accordingly. This is the model that we came up with at the end of that phase 2. And just this is where we're at right now. And very, very briefly, just to finish up by sort of saying, we know how time poor L&D is, and we know that the supports are needed. So from September till February this year, we've been developing out this software. Now, if you're familiar with project management, and if you're familiar with the tool Trello or some other sort of project management tool, we see this as kind of being that for business value of L&D. So it's a support, because if you have 5 or 6 projects going on, you're trying to do your PEAS across the projects. This is basically a scaffold to help you through that. And if you go back to that statement that I was talking about, that is in effect the business value statement, you can see there's columns aligned to each of them. And we're scaffolding you across that to help you define and then re-estimate what your business value was. It's heavily scaffolded across the different ideas. So for instance, if we just take this one of your organization effect, you can see we have a 5-step scaffold to get you there. And as I say, each project can be tracked in here, and ultimately delivering both your predicted value and actually what was delivered in the end. So where are we at? So basically, I'm going to back out now to the people who've worked with us to date to get them to kind of test this, because they're so familiar with the project and with how it works already. They're in a great position to kind of bug test it for us. And then we're going to go back and produce a minimum viable product based on this. How would this get to L&D? We're already talking to some LMS providers about potentially this being sort of embedded in LMS as one possible way. There are others. We could look at a license route, but probably it will be nice to see it in that kind of embedded in an LMS as an additional function within that. Thank you so much for your time. I've probably gone on a little bit too long. Apologies about that. But just to say, this is Pulse, which is based on the Kpis model. But we're also doing some great work at the moment in terms of, you know, health and safety training, and how can we make that sort of more engaging, immersive, and effective. And likewise, as we all find ourselves in this kind of blended online world, we're also investigating the whole area of onboarding, pre-boarding, off-boarding, and that whole kind of life cycle around onboarding, and see how can we support that in this kind of online environment. And we've loads of other projects either done or bubbling up as well at the moment. So look, thank you so much for your time today. Tom, I think you're going to join us back.
Yep. Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for that. That was a very insightful presentation, as always. And in the spirit of further connecting Learnovate research with the real world of industry, we are delighted to be joined by 3 panelists, all with a huge amount of experience in the field of L&D. First up, we have Davey Mclinden from Axiom Law, who has previously worked for PwC in the Northern Irish Assembly and has managed training programs across the world. We also have Sharon Claffey-Kaloubi with Learning Pool, who joins us from across the pond in Boston. And she has extensive experience in the L&D sector, both in Ireland and in the US. Hi, Sharon.
Hey there.
And finally, we have Barry Harper, who is the founder and CEO of the Envolve Group, who have developed a learning and development platform, which is now available in more than 25 countries and used by some of the biggest global brands. Thank you all for joining us here. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Tom.
So we've heard what Peter's doing with this model, and I'm interested to get some reactions from our industry panelists. How does this resonate with you, Davey?
Yeah, it's probably to repeat some of the stuff that Peter said, but then just to give you, I'll talk about our example very briefly. But we do now prefer to talk about business impact and business value when discussing learning and development interventions. And for us, it's no longer good enough just to talk about the contribution you're making to the individual or that team. You actually have to link that contribution to the wider business, the business impact, the business results. And I thought that was an interesting slide, Peter, that you showed. It showed the ROI measurements and revenue more or less at the bottom. But for our example, I think we have a few things to do. So we're going to embark on working with this model. We've been working on it already. But I think there's a few things we need to do. One is we almost need to re-educate some of our stakeholders where they sort of still value as, get bums on seats and get good evaluations. So we need to re-educate those guys. You don't have to re-educate people like CFOs and things like that in the finance world. They get it. And I think the second thing we have to do is we have to do the work. We have to do the before and the after work. And just on the example for recruiting of our sales team, if you think about the before, if you think about it just a ramp time, you have a salesperson that leaves and you have this ramp time from recruitment right through to them making a sale. And this ramp time, there's an impact to the cost and the revenue on the business, but that is not easily identifiable or easily ring-fenced, that cost, but it can be calculated. There's enough information in the set of accounts for you to go in and work that out. As Peter said, partnership with other people, talk to finance, talk to recruitment. And you can ring fence that figure. They can say, do you know how much this is to cost you from when someone leaves to recruit right through to making another sale? And then you can show the after, that we've reduced the time, and the after you maybe have reduced the costs. You maybe have an impact on the revenue as well. Some people could argue, well, it's only a cash flow impact on the revenue. Well, cash is king in business, so even better again that you can show not only are we helping with sales, but we're also helping with cash flow because of that delay in someone leaving. So we can demonstrate it that way, but lots of work to do with the before we can do that, and with the re-education.
Yeah, thank you, Davey. That's a good perspective on that. That actually begs the question, and I might throw this follow up to Sharon and Barry on what other kinds of KPIs can we measure to show the business value. I mean, Davey's talking about costs and sales and things like that. But what are some other KPIs maybe that we might have?
So if I can jump in, Tom, because I love this question. I love the setup that Peter's done. I was a longtime L&D at a bank institution and at financial services. The best thing you can do, and it goes on pen and paper, get the business goals. I know Peter states it as business problem, business goal, business problem. I'm American. We're a lot more positive, but it's the same thing. Really have them outlined, not in learning terms, but in business terms. So I'll take onboarding. The business goal here would be to increase speed to productivity of the new hire. And the criteria of success would be to ensure that the employee feels as though they've made the best professional decision of their career to join the company. Now, why those two things? You can measure both of them. The other thing, and I put this in the chat, is get the stakeholders to sign off on it. If they're not signed off on it, maybe you shouldn't be doing that work or that project. And once you push it back on the onus for the stakeholder or the champion, as Peter put out there, to take that on, the KPIs will have to come through and they will be measured because you got the sign off before. It's scary. You may feel on this, but Peter, I love the fact that you're saying that you're going to work with companies with the LMS. We're a patron member of the Learnovate Center. And although we've been talking for a couple of months now, I'm putting my hand up. Learning Pool would love to have this technology embedded. And I just want to put a shout out to the group there is having this membership to a research organization. You can't pay enough money for something like that. The research and the talent that is over at Learnovate is amazing. So I know that they didn't want me to jump there, but I'm going there anyways. So Barry, I'm sure you have something to add as well.
Well, I think the sort of following on from what Peter and Davey were talking about, like in terms of value in terms of learning, when we're talking to our clients, it kind of falls into two brackets, and one is easier to demonstrate value than the other. And the harder of the two is the soft skill type value, where you're spending budget on training people on a particular skill, and then the value to the business is going to be demonstrated over the months and years following that investment in that person. And sometimes that's very subjective, and it's when you take it to a CFO or whatever to try to sign off on those budgets, it's not always an easy sell depending on what money is available in the pot. The second type of value when we look at when we're engaging with our clients is the L&D function as a whole, as its entirety. The sort of the content, the solutions, the way the people, the way the whole function kind of partners with the business to drive value, and that's a little bit easier. But what we find is, again, that's kind of split into two. And like a good example is one of our recent engagement with a client in the food sector, and we had engaged with them. They wanted to implement our solution, but then the head of HR at the end of it was saying, this all sounds great. I can see the value, but now I have to put the numbers on it. I have to take it to the CFO. I have to put a budget plan together in this, that if we spend X amount of euros or dollars on this, we're going to get X amount back. So a lot of our engagements with our clients kind of start there now. Sharon, kind of what you're saying is setting the metric at the very start. What is it that you're going to measure in a short period of time, right? And then we kind of split that down into two, and this is where our engagement comes as well. It's some of that L&D function as a whole value can be sort of medium to long term, and the value isn't kind of visible there on day one or month one or whatever. It's kind of like a lot of our clients would be sort of compliance driven in regulated industries. So reducing risk of non-conformances, reducing risk of customer issues, reducing turnover of staff, increasing productivity. These things are kind of falling into what Peter's talking about in terms of this model that can be measured over time. But there's another piece of value which is a lot more tangible, and this is kind of our company's North Star metric from our customer success perspective is the value in month one. Can you demonstrate value in month one, in quarter one, in year one? And when we engage with the client, that's what we do. We actually work out what we work through our return on investment and the value proposition and do a cost benefit analysis and say, in month one, this is the type of value that you're going to get out. And some of it isn't the longer term stuff where you're talking about the soft skills. A lot of our clients would get value just by digital transformation of current stuff that's not digitalized. Okay. Yep. I'll give a good example. One of our clients signed up with Involve, maybe it was around late last year. And part of our solution is the capturing of e-signatures using tablet devices instead of signing off documents for document control and procedures and stuff like that. And that one client, in the first month, they captured, I think it was about 2,500 e-signatures using our technology. So we were able to go back, and in our model, it actually presented the information on the report to the client at the end of the month to say, well, if you hadn't used Involve, you'd have captured signatures on sheets of paper with filing cabinets and Excel and reporting and putting it into a filing cabinet. Whereas we were able to say, well, now you've done that using Involve. So we can actually put a hard figure that the L&D manager was able to go back to the finance department and says, hey, do you remember 2 months ago when I asked you for that money? Guess what? Now I've got value, and they're able to put a number on it. And I think that's the key thing in terms of convincing the powers that be that hold the checkbooks is that the value can be real. It can be in month one if you put the metrics in place. First of all, it's kind of what Sharon was saying. So, hey, there's some companies doing it well, and if I'm honest, probably most aren't doing that quite well.
But Barry, bravo, because to do it in the 30 days puts really a fire under their butt. And Tom, I know you're going to reference this later, but I believe the pandemic has accelerated the need for this digital transformation. Metrics and making sure that you have systems that can get this data back is mission critical. And right now it's not being questioned as much because people know that everything has gone virtual. So they can't physically see, and not that that was a great way to measure. But Barry, that is those month and the quarter right off the bat, that is 100% the way to go with this.
Yeah, it's not always easy to do, Sharon.
No, it isn't. I was in that wrong.
Easy to do so. But if you get the sort of the right mindset from the HR, L&D, the CFO, the finance team, the C-suite, then you can do it. It's definitely doable. Someone just needs to ask the question and join up the dots.
Absolutely.
Deliver that value back.
Yeah. I just very briefly on that say, and we've talked about this obviously in other platforms, and you do hear back this idea of, but what if we can't get the data? I would sort of suggest you really start to need thinking about that because
get an LXP, get the right element, get the right platform and technology or manual. Yeah. I mean, it's not an option nowadays.
I think that's the point I was getting to is, you might be getting away with it now, but I with the importance of human capital going forward, I think it's going to be mandatory that you're able to show this.
But it's amazing, Peter, the amount of organizations that we would find actually that may have an LMS, but somewhere in the L&D team, there's that sneaky little Excel document still sneaking about.
Yep.
Yeah, it's still there. It's tracking something that's doing somewhere in the business somewhere. And
it's like the movie The Office. It's the red stapler that's in the cellar, right?
Yeah, there's something somewhere. And so the technology, as Sharon was saying, that there's technology solutions there available to do this. And it's just a matter of evaluating what is the metrics, what is the North Star, and for us, all of our engagements, and this is when it goes well for us, is we focus on the bottom line number. If you're selling this to the CFO, what are you going to reduce the cost? Are you going to increase productivity? You got to put a number on it.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So as more companies are starting to try and measure these business impacts, are they succeeding? Are they successful and able to get this data? I might even throw it back to Davey and just say, are we able to get the numbers that we want to get out of these?
This thought has just come into my head, but I've seen 2 reports where people have showed the return on investment for training courses, and both were ridiculous, and you couldn't have stood over both. And I think we've done a lot of damage out there with that type of approach. And these are just two organizations I happen to work with, but they were almost overselling to say, look at the return on investment. I was like, send an auditor in there and look at that. You probably couldn't stand over 90% of that figure. So yeah, I think we're coming back to this is a much better approach. This is so much better than that. And I think that's, getting the data, putting the work in. You're doing a business case. You look at a business case for any type of expenditure, you have to put the money in. And, the bottom line here is you're talking about business impact, monetary value, then there's going to be a business impact. There has to be. Right. But yeah, I think this is a much better, much more refreshing approach from what I've seen. People just throwing
and they don't usually they don't usually question marketing or ops for some of the technology they need to get the data back. And Tom, I'm going to ask you a question. I mean, is Learnovate there to advise companies on what and how to do it? I mean, you're not a vendor for the sake of vendor. You're a research agency. Folks could reach out to you guys, right? And just say, this is what we're looking to do. We just sat in this session here. How do we do like the predictive analysis once you get further along with data analytics and things? You guys have tons of smart folks over there.
Well, we do. And a lot of what we do is try and take what the research shows and what our researchers are discovering and translate that into practical, usable tools for industry. Because at the end of the day, we're funded by Enterprise Ireland and the IDA. And our job is to get these tools into the economy where they can create jobs and exports and, business efficiencies. So you're right. What Peter's doing with this research is trying to take that academic research and turn it into a usable, practical tool. I just we have we have time for one more question. We've got a couple minutes of getting flagged by the organizers that we've got to wind it down. But one of the things that I wanted to throw out for the whole panel really is how do we see are there tensions between the traditional incumbent L&D models of measuring learner satisfaction, learner success, and this? Is there tensions there, or is this a easy process to take? I see Sharon raising her hand, trying to jump.
Well, trying to be polite. I'll make it quick. Our company isn't seeing the tension, but they're seeing the confusion out there, which is even why I asked for that advisory role with Learnovate. So we're offering, and I'm sure you guys will send it out, a learning analytics maturity model, just something for folks to go through and see where are we. We've not found many people beyond stage 1 or 2, which means they know they should have the analytics, but whoa, how do we do it? So I think there's a desire. Everybody wants to align to the business. We've been talking about it for 100 years, but now is the opportunity to say how we do it. And that'll be different for every organization, whether L&D or sales enablement or it's under marketing and ops. That's what we're seeing is first you need to analyze and see where you're at and kind of get the advice to know which direction to go into.
I know we're short in time here, but just my thoughts on that. Just following up what Davey was saying, for the amount of times, Davey, you've seen 2 companies with ROIs on courses. I've seen 102. You know, and it's like sort of, hey, it's not worth the Excel that is typed into some of these ROI calculations, you know, and you wonder where in God's name they got the numbers from. So what we focus a lot on, like, sort of is when the L&D teams start thinking transactional in nature, when they start thinking, look, this is something that's a metric, this is a number that is real, that can be tracked on a weekly or monthly basis. Then it's a lot easier to sort of show that value, and there isn't that tension. I think when the L&D teams are putting their value prop as being sort of, yes, we're going to improve X, Y, and Z, which is the sort of the things that are maybe in 2 months or 5 months or 12 months down the line, it's not always easy. And 99 times out of 100, no one ever goes back to check it. So once the budget is approved once, then you go back for a second bite at the cherry. It's like, well, hey, you never demonstrated the value the first time around. So what we try to do with all of our clients is to make sure that sort of the value that is promised, that the L&D team is promising to their business, to the CFO and to the C-level, that we're promising to our clients, we deliver on that. And that's why our customer success team focus on that. It's just value. Like the report they get every month is just value. That's the big number. It's on the sheet. It's like, this is what we promised. This is what we've delivered. And it's
Barry, do you get them to sign off on it? Like that was always a challenge when I was in charge of L&D groups. Once they had to put pen to paper or e-signature, they really thought about what they were signing up for.
At the very start, Sharon, yes, a good point. Is it because it's easier, obviously, then to get them to sign off on the value. But the reality is, the majority of clients don't know the value. So you have to actually educate them on the value to get them to sign off on it. So you're coming to a client or coming to an industry with a lot of experience of talking to other people in the same industry and say, well, you may not know the answer. We may not be 100% correct, but we're not far away either. So because all of these other clients are telling us this is what they're saying, we can give examples of all that. So that's kind of, as long as you can back it up with facts, is the best part.
Yeah. Could I just to say, confusion is a great word, you know, and I think that's why we talk about that separation here. You know, it was the apples, oranges. That is confusing. And I do think the separating the two activities, learner metrics, business value, it really helps you in terms of clarity. But again, just building on something Barry said a little bit earlier, in this research and as part of this very short next phase, there aren't a million things that can be affected within an organization. It's actually quite a discrete number. And that scaffolding that we're looking to put in place will be, you know, is it cost saving? Is it improve or increase production? Is it increase sales? And we're looking to scaffold. And that first part of identifying the business value may actually end up being a drop down that you interrogate the people coming to you with. You know, you'll be sort of saying, well, which of these is it? Which are you trying to do? Just in terms of helping L&D do this on an ongoing basis, you know.
And on that note, you know, thank you, Peter, for mentioning that we are progressing with this research, and also, you know, wrap this up and remind people that there is a masterclass on this topic scheduled for the 20th of May. So have a look at that. And guys, thank you very much for your participation today. Davey, Sharon, Barry, all of you, and Peter, thanks so much for that presentation. I think we'll wrap it up here.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.